Hello, this is Lolita, and I'm here at Hiram Life Home for South Maya, Quezon City, Philippine Island. We will now hear the life history of James Carroll Bagley. Ako si Lolita Valerio, nandito ngayon sa Hiram Life Home for South Maya, Quezon City, bayan ng Pilipinas. At ngayon, nandito sa bahay nila Mr. and Mrs. Bagley.
Very beauty all around, when there's love at home, there is joy in every sound, when there's love at home, peace and plenty will abide, smiling sweet on every side, and the softly, sweetly bright, when there's love at home, love at home, love at home, and the softly, sweetly bright, when there's love at home. In the coffee there is joy, when there's love at home. Earth and ending air unknown, when there's love at home. Rose and beauty starting, all the earth are golden sweet, making life a bliss complete, when there's love at home, love at home, love at home, making life a bliss complete, when there's love at home. Kindly heaven smiles above, when there's love at home. All the world is filled with love, when there's love at home. Sweeter things are birds apart, brighter easy as the sky. Oh, there's one who smiles at time, when there's love at home, love at home, love at home. Oh, there's one who smiles at time, when there's love at home. Hello, this is Thursday morning, October 27th, 1977. And this tape is being prepared so that I might leave with you my life history. Now, the little girl, little Olivia, the little Filipino girl, has been with us ever since we arrived here. And she is the one that's living with us, and she spoke first in English, and then, of course, it was followed by Filipino. Now, the song you listened to, I didn't say music, I said the song you listened to was your mom and dad's attempt to sing a song. Anyway, don't pay attention to the music, but to listen to the words, and remember they go down through the years and they have more significance and meaning to it. Now, as I this tape, it was taken from what I had written, but I thought, well, I'll put it on tape, and then it won't take up so much space, and it'll be your set, and then you won't have to take time to read it. You can go about your work if you want to listen to this tape. But as I start this, I think of a little poem that I ran across a while back, and I wished I had this poem when we first got married, and maybe I would have realized then what a responsibility I had of being a father. For as much as my children are all raised, I think now that I still must follow this advice because of the number of grandchildren that we have. And perhaps when we get back home, there'll be some little grandchildren that will be following me, and they're going to watch what Grandpa does. And so here's this cute little poem entitled, "A Careful Man I Ought to Be." A careful man I ought to be. A little fellow follows me. I do not dare to go astray, for fear he'll go the self-same way. I cannot once escape his eyes. Whate'er he sees me do, he tries. Like me he says he's going to be this little cat that follows me. I must remember as I go through summer heat and winter snow. I am building for the years to be the little cat who follows me. I not only think of our 3 sons, but I also think of our 5 lovely daughters. As I begin this life history, I can say, as Nephi said, I, Nephi, having been born of goodly parents, therefore I was taught somewhat of all the learning of my father. Was, even though I was only 9 years old when my father died, I can still remember a lot of his wonderful teachings. There's 2 things that have stood out in my memory, and I have passed these on to my children in the past, and I think that it will always be valuable to me the rest of my days. These 2 things which my father said to me not long before he died. First was, Carroll, up to now, the Bagley name is good. What are you going to do about it? And the second thing I remember him saying is, all there is to a man is his word. If his word is not good or he cannot be depended upon, there is nothing to that man. So these 2 statements have been a guide to me throughout my life, because my father had a wonderful name, He was to be he was trusted. He was admired for his good judgment, even though he was only 42 years of age when he died, leaving my mom and 7 of us children. So I will go now on with what I have written and hope that it will, as the years go by, that sometime in the future years, when you're all older, that it will have some value to you as a history of me. I was born July the 20th, 1910, in a little log house down in the cow pasture. After I got older, I can remember going and looking at it. It was a one-room building and had a board floor and a lumber roof. But the other house which the family lived in was a rough log building with a dirt roof and a dirt floor. The house was pretty well surrounded by big sagebrush and rabbit brush higher than the house. The summer I was born, my parents built a new house up in the little village of Greenwich. In the fall, the family moved into the new home. There was 5 of us children and my parents at this time, and the house still stands today. After we moved into the new home, there was 2 more girls born, which now made a family of 7 children, 4 girls and 3 boys. We lived on the farm and raised hay and grain. These were the only crops we could grow, as we always had a killing frost around the 10th of June and another one the 10th of September, so that didn't give a very long growing season. We always milked a few cows, as that was our main income. We did raise a few hogs for sale, a few beef animals, and sometimes a little extra grain to sell. The way we got our hogs and grain to market was with a team of horses and a wagon, and our market was 40 miles away, or an 80-mile trip, which would take 2 to 3 days. Also, our transportation was a team of horses and a buggy. I was 6 years old when we got our first automobile, which was a 1916 Ford. We was the 3rd family in the whole valley to get a car. We had many experiences with this car, but I won't say they were all happy ones. The roads were so terrible, being narrow and very rough and winding. I could tell of many scary experiences, and it is a miracle that I am alive today to write this. There was also some interesting things that happened to the people that bought cars. Of course, they had driven horses all their lives and would get the team to stop by pulling up on the lines and saying, "Whoa." Many interesting things took place as the farmer yelled "whoa," and the car continued on its way until finally he realized it wasn't a team of horses. Yes, there was a few fences, gates, that were broken up, and some cars ended up in a ditch. It was also the practice that in October or early November, when the snow came and it got cold, the car was put in the shed and put on blocks where it stayed until warm weather came in the spring and the snow melted. Our next new automobile was a 1919 Oakland. We surely thought we had a fancy car when we got it. We had it for a total of 11 years, and we drove it all of 22,000 miles during that time. World War I was on during the early days of this car, and tires were so hard to get and were so expensive, so we had to patch the inner tubes and use boots in the tires if we wanted to use the car. I remember one trip we took to go visit Uncle Gas and Ellen, about 50 miles away. It took us all day long, and we had to fix 13 flats. It was my oldest brother, Voyle, who was doing the driving and tire fixing. And after fixing the 13th flat, we were riding along very nicely, and we were getting close to Uncle Gass's. Well, I was just a small boy, and I had an air gun. I loaded it and pulled the trigger, and when it went off, Boyle thought it was another flat. Well, when he found out it was my air gun, you know what. Actually, I thought he should have been happy to know that it was my air gun instead of a flat tire. Nevertheless, I can imagine how he felt. Anyway, another instance where I did survive. After having the Oakland for 11 years, my brother wanted to get a new car. And when he asked the dealer how much he would give for the Oakland, he said, "Nothing. You would have to pay me to take it." We took the body off of the Oakland and converted it into a small truck, and finally it ended up as an engine to run our sheep-shearing outfit. Boyle bought a new 1928 Dodge in the fall of 1929, and this is the car that I drove when we went to get married and went on our honeymoon in June 1934. So much for the automobile part. Now we will go back to when I was 5 years old. That is when I started to school in a little two-room schoolhouse. The building was heated with a wood-burning stove in each room. The toilet facilities was two one-holers that sat in the sagebrush back of the schoolhouse. I went to school here through the 7th grade, and even though we were few in number, we had a lot of fun in school plays, operas, and dances. Even though there were only 2 of us in the class the first year I went to school there was 3 more that came in the next year to make a total of 5 of us in the class for the balance of the time I went to school. When I was only 5 years old, I also started milking cows. It was in the summertime, and we had one of the cows that was easy to milk and was gentle. My oldest sister Zola was learning how to milk, so I wanted to learn how too, so one of us would get on each side and milk. That was fun then, but when winter came and I had learned to milk, then I had my cows to milk twice a day. As I got older, I had more responsibility given me, such as feeding the cows, and during the winter months, clean the cow shed. It was so cold that the droppings during the night could be like concrete of a morning, so it was my job to clean the shed each morning so that the cows would have a clean, smooth place to lay at night. The cows just laid on the cold ground, as we didn't have any bedding for them, as we used the straw from our grain crop to feed the range cattle for a short time during the winter, or as long as the straw would last. I was also given the job of feeding the cows most of the time, and in the winter time I thought at times my fingers and toes would freeze off. When I was young, we didn't sell whole milk as there was not a market for it. We put our milk through a cream separator. We fed the skim milk to the calves and our hogs and sold the cream as sour cream, which was picked up once a week by a man with a team of horses and a wagon. The cream check is the money we had to live on, and I'll tell you, that wasn't very much. Groceries is something we didn't buy very much of. From the wheat we raised, and after thrashing in the fall of the year, we would load up a wagon load of wheat and take that to the flour mill and trade for enough for flour and cereal to do us for the next year. We would raise enough potatoes, carrots, and onions and store in the cellar to do us for the winter. We did not have any refrigeration, So in the fall, we would kill a beef to last us during the cold weather. We would have pork the year round because we could cure it by using salt or smoking it. During the short summer, we did have wonderful vegetables out of the garden, and a lot of them were put up in bottles to use during the winter months. The amount of money spent for groceries was very small because so much of the food we ate was produced on the farm, and so much of the food was bread, milk, cream, butter, eggs, potatoes, and the meat that was produced on the farm. I can remember so many of the meals at night were just bread and milk, or toast and milk, or lumpy dish, which was made with milk and flour. Quite a contrast with what we have today, but I guess it didn't do too much harm, as here I am, 67 years of age. Another event that happened when I was 5 years old was my father was on a horse, and he was chasing after one of the steers when the horse stumbled and fell with the horn of the saddle hitting my father in the back. Sometime later, my father started to go numb in his thumbs and his big toes. He started going to various doctors, but they were unable to do him any good. He continued to get worse by becoming paralyzed, so eventually he could not walk nor feed himself. The various muscles of his body wasted away until finally the heart and lungs failed. So after 4 years of suffering, he died January the 29th, 1920, when I was only 9 years of age. That left my mother with 7 children, with Boyle being the oldest and 18 years of age, and Vera the youngest, just a small child. When he died, it was during the World War I flu epidemic when people were dying by the thousands. It was impossible to have a funeral for him, so a few that could help came, and he was put in a casket and put in a small pickup and hauled to the cemetery and buried. The cemetery is in a very rocky place. The casket was put in a wooden box and placed in the grave, and the few men that were there proceeded to fill the grave up with the dirt and rocks. I can still hear those rocks as the first was dropped on that wooden box. By May, the flu had eased up enough, so they held a memorial service for my young father, who was only 42 years old when he died. He died leaving a wonderful name, and he was well respected by all who knew him. About the time my father got hurt, or maybe before, my mother started having trouble with a sore on her nose. It would not heal up, so she went to doctors in Utah and California that they could not do her any good, as it was now in cancer. There was only one hospital in the country that could take care of cancers at this time, and that was the Dr. Nichols Sanitarium in Savannah, Missouri. Vera, my youngest sister, was only a few weeks old when my parents left us 7 children and went back to Missouri. That wasn't a very happy Christmas for us, but the people in our little community did so much to try to make it a nice Christmas for us. I can still see all of us over to Uncle and our Uncle Cyrenus and Aunt Lucille's and the big Christmas tree. On this trip to Missouri, the doctors removed my mother's nose, and they thought they had it all taken care of. They came back home and thought all was well, when another spot on her jaw below her ear began to give trouble. So it was necessary for them to go back again. This time it was a very serious operation because the cancer was so close to the jugular vein that they had to go to get all of the cancer. About 3 years after my father died, She had to go back to Missouri, her third and last trip, to have a spot taken from her forehead. After that, she had several spots appear at different times, but Dr. Clark in Provo was able to take care of them by treating them with an electric instrument. The year my father died, Boyle got married, so the next year my mother and the 4 girls moved to Sherman, 6 miles away, so the girls could go to school there. My brother Grant was in Ephraim, going to Snow College. Instead of me going with my mother, I stayed with Boyle and Emma that winter. Then, in the fall, my mother moved to Ephraim so the girls could go to high school and Grant could live with her and go to college. My mother took one boy as a boarder to live with them to get some income to live off of. She also did housework for some of the more well-to-do families in Ephraim. She worked a long, hard day for $1. The second year my mother was in Ephraim, I also lived with her during school season and went to school. My first year there, I was in the 8th grade, and I continued that until I had graduated from high school and went to Snow College for 1 year. Also, the first year I was in Ephraim, Boyle and Emma also moved to Ephraim so they could go to school and finish their high school work. Due to so much sickness in the family, Boyle had gotten 2 years of high school only before my father died. For 2 years, all 7 of us children, plus Boyle's wife Emma, was in school. In order for all of us to go to school, Boyle and Grant run the moving picture machines, and I did the janitor work and kept the fires for the show house in Ephraim, which was coal stove. During the Christmas holidays, we also run a roller skating rink. We all had to work at various jobs. Even Vera would go babysit children older than herself. The result of it was that all graduated from high school, and Grant graduated from Snow College so he could teach school. While we were all going to school in Ephraim, Boyle and I purchased some sheep and got started in the sheep business. We purchased them in Fountain Green and had to trail them for over 100 miles out to the ranch. We walked and drove the sheep all the way, Boyle and I taking turns following in the car. Boyle purchased 100 head and I got 30. This started me in the sheep business, of which I was for 10 years, or until after I was married. In fact, I had sheep for 2 summers after we were married. The first year we were married, we lived together for only about 1/3 of the time, as I was out with the sheep. After we had been married a little over a year, our first child, Carroll Jean, was born at Provo. I took time off to go to Provo and be there for the birth of our first child. I had only 10 days to be gone from home, as Boyle was out with the sheep while I was gone, so I had to get back home again so I could go herd sheep so Boyle could come home and irrigate. I arrived in Provo on June the 22nd, and on June the 24th, Carroll took a dose of castor oil, and then that night our Grandma Olson took us for a ride in the car over the roughest road she could find, including the rough railroad tracks. The results, June the 25th, our first baby was born. Was I a proud daddy at about 25 years of age? In those days, after a baby was born, the mother had to stay in bed for 10 days. Inasmuch as I had to take the train for home the night of the 4th of July, the doctor did let me take Pearl and the baby to my mother's home on July the 3rd, providing she still stayed in bed. The night of the 4th of July, after the big celebration at the BYU Stadium, I took the train and headed back to the ranch. I went out to the sheep herd again, where I stayed for about a month, and then I took the car and went to Provo to get Pearl and the baby Carroll Jean. From about the 1st of August until the 10th of October, I spent most of my time at the sheep herd. In the meantime, Boyle and I had talked her over and had decided the farm was not large enough to support two families. He said he would either sell his interest to me or I could sell my interest to him. I decided to sell to him my shares in the farm and my part of the sheep. So on October the 15th, 1935, we took a few of our belongings and our baby girl, Carroll Jean, and left for Provo, not knowing what we were going to do or where we would live. We didn't have a car, so we got a ride to Sigurd, 35 miles away, and then took the train to Provo. What a trip. Carroll Jean cried most of the way to Provo with the colic, of which she had suffered with since she was born, and did for another 4 or 5 months. When we left the ranch, we left without hardly any money. As I told Boyle, I did not want any money for my sheep until we found a place to buy, as I was afraid that if we got the money, we would spend it, and then we would find a place. When we would find a place, we would not have any money to buy with. We moved in with the Pearl's folks on the dairy, and I started to help them run the dairy, and this lasted for 2 years. It was a hard 2 years, but well worth it because the experience. Until November, I would get up at 3:30 and go and deliver the night's milk while they milked the cows of the morning. I'd get back and have breakfast and then take the bottled morning's milk and deliver to the rest of my customers, plus I would deliver to the grocery stores. By this time, it was anywhere from 10 o'clock to about noon when I would get home. I then had to mark my delivered book and check in the money I had collected. I would eat dinner and once in a while get a nap before milking again at 3:30. After 2 years on the dairy, I decided I wanted to go to Utah State Agriculture College and finish my schooling. I knew the only way I could go to school was by getting a job at the university. So I wrote to the state extension dairyman to see about a job. He was in Provo a short time later and told me about a cow testing job opening, and they would be picking a new man for the job in 2 days. He suggested that I should get my application in if I was interested in the job. He suggested that a couple of years of this experience would be of great value to me. So I got busy and got my application ready and some recommendations. The day came for deciding on the new man for the job, and there was 9 applications, and I was the one that got the job. Now I had a job to test dairy cows in Utah and Wasatch counties, which would be a lot of traveling, and I did not have an automobile. This was the fall of 1937, and I purchased a 1935 used Chevrolet from Uncle Angus Olson, as he was an automobile dealer. I paid $350 for it. Now that I was not working at the dairy anymore, it was necessary for us to move, so we had to find a place to move to. When I started working on the dairy, I was paid $30 a month, and then sometime later my salary was increased to $45 a month, and when I quit from my new job, I was getting all of $60 a month. My new job's income was based on the number of herds and cows tested, and when I started, the income was about $160 a month. And out of this, I had to make a monthly payment on the car of $40 a month, our rent, pay for gasoline and all expenses on the car, and all living expenses. Some of the herds tested I got paid only every 3 months. So sometimes the money we had was very small, but it seemed like we could always get by until I would make another collection, as it was up to me to collect from the dairyman myself. March the 4th, 1938 came along, and so did the sweet little baby girl, our Glenna. I loved our little Carroll Jean so much that I was afraid for the next child to be born, as I was afraid that I could not love another child as much as I did our first child, Carroll Jean. As the years went on and more children were born, I found out that it did not make any difference how many children came, we could love them all. In fact, when Shanna Lee, our number 8, was born, you would have thought she was the first baby in the Bagley family because of the happiness of all the other older children. Carroll Jean and Glenna were both born at the Crane Maternity Home in Provo. It cost us $5 a day or $50 for the 10-day stay, and the doctor bill was $35. While Glenna was still in the maternity home, she got infected with impetigo, and what a job it was to get it healed up. In 1938, we traded our old Shiv car in on a new 1938 Shiv car. It was a deluxe, and it cost us $927. Boy, was we proud to have a new car, but did we have to scrimp to pay for it. But I had to have a car, and the old one had served its time. We really enjoyed this car, and in June 1939, we took our new car, Aunt Maida, Aunt Vera, and Byron Woodland, Vera's future husband, and went on a trip to California. We left Carroll Jean with Grandma Bagley and Glenna with Aunt Ruby. We was gone for 10 days and had a wonderful time. Carroll Jean was old enough so her and Grandma Bagley had a good time, and Glenna was young enough so in the 10 days she got attached to Aunt Ruby. So when we went to pick up Glenna, and of course her mother went running to get her baby from Aunt Ruby, but instead of Glenna wanting her mother, she put her arms around Aunt Ruby's neck and didn't want to go to her mother. Of course, it brought tears to her mother's eyes to think that in 10 days' time her baby could fall in love with someone else. The trip to California was a wonderful one. We were gone 10 days, traveled 2,500 miles, and our total gasoline bill was less than $40. Maida, Vera, and Byron paid for the gas and oil, so it cost them $13 each for the 2,500-mile trip. This was the year the World Fair was held on Treasure Island by San Francisco. We went on to Los Angeles, up through Nevada, and home. After we returned home from our trip, I went to Utah State Agricultural University for a state dairy day. All 13 cow testers from the state was asked to meet in the extension dairyman's office. 2 men from the morning milk came in and met each of us and visited with us for a while and then left. Some days later, I received a telephone call from one of the men and asked if I would be interested in going to work for the morning milk company. I told him it all depended on what they had to offer. So he told me that if I was interested, to be at the Mayflower apartment in Salt Lake City that night and meet Mr. Lockhart, the president of the company. We went to Salt Lake, and I met with them, and they explained the job to me, and the salary to start with would be $125 a month, plus all expenses on the car, and at the end of 2 years driving of the car, the company would pay the difference in the price between the old car and the new one. Before I left them, I told them I would take the job. So September the 21st, 1939, I started working for the Morning Milk Company at Wellsville, Utah. The company wanted me to start out with a new car, so I traded the Chevy in on a 1940 Nash Ambassador. The Chev had only 21,000 miles on it, but the new Nash cost me only $1,079. The monthly payments on the new car was $48 a month, and our rent was $17 a month. These two payments took half of the check, and my paycheck was only $125, so that left us $63 a month to live. We had a very interesting year that we lived in Smithfield. In May of 1940, another fellow and I was sent to the Yakima Valley to survey the area to see about the possibility of building a new evaporated milk plant there. This was a nice experience during the 2 weeks' time we were gone. We returned home and I made and gave our report, but because of the progress of World War II, it was decided not to build a new plant at that time, which resulted in the two of us getting laid off in September of 1940. Being out of work, we went back to Provo, and I went to work at the dairy again, but this time we lived in a house in town. While we were living in Provo again, another very important event took place. Just as the sirens and bells were sounding, welcoming in the new year, 1941, we were walking into the new Utah Valley Hospital, where at 2:30 a.m. our third child and first son, Kent, was born. Kent was the first 1941 baby born and the first New Year's baby to have been born in the new hospital. Now we had 3 children to take care of and not much of an income. I worked at the dairy until the middle of March, and then I got a job with the Indian Service at Tuba City, Arizona. So about the 21st of March, we arrived in Tuba City. We lived in the farmhouse on the farm outside of Tuba City, and I took care of the farm and helped some at the dairy, which supplied milk for the big Indian school there. After being there for only around a month, I received a phone call from the Morning Milk Company wanting me to go work for them again. I told them that the only way I would consider it would be as long as my work was satisfactory, I would have a job. Mr. Lockhart told me that if I would come back, he was sure it would prove to be very interesting, of which it did, and lasted until I retired, December the 31st, 1972. The end of April of 1941 found us moving back to Smithfield, Utah, back to the same house we had lived in there before. The 1st of May, I left for the Yakima Valley in Washington again. I was sent alone this time, but I had been in Yakima only a few days when 4 more of the company men came to help me with the survey. After about 2 weeks' time, the survey was completed, and the company had time to go over the results of our report. They decided to build a new plant at Sunnyside, Washington. Inasmuch as I was to be sent to Sunnyside to be the field supervisor, responsible for the milk supply to operate the plant, I was the first employee to be transferred there. So August the 1st found us arriving in strange land 750 miles from where we had been living. Here I began a big responsibility of developing a supply of milk that would make this new operation a financial success after all the money the company had spent to build this big, new modern evaporated milk plant. When we left Utah, we had planned on renting a house to live in at first, because I didn't know whether we would like living there or maybe my job would not work out satisfactory. Being the 1st of August, it was so hot when we arrived in Sunnyside, and we had to stay in an auto cart for about 2 weeks before our furniture arrived by train. While we were renting and waiting for our furniture to arrive, we looked for a place to live, but we could not find anything satisfactory to rent, so we looked at several places for sale. The one place we looked at was for rent, but also for sale. If we had have rented it, it would have cost us $40 a month rent, but by buying it, our monthly payment was only $30 a month. We decided to purchase the place for $3,500. It was located on 6th Street in Sunnyside and had been built only 2 years. Kenneth Matheson, who owned the place, had moved to Grandview to live. After we decided to purchase the place, then I wrote to Boyle and asked him to send me the money for my sheep, which he had purchased from me when we left the farm. Now I was really happy that I did not get the money when we left the farm. We received enough money from the sheep to make a good down payment, and the balance was carried by the Valley Savings and Loan Company at Prosser. While we were trying to find a place to live in and waiting for our furniture to come, we lived in an auto cart, and oh, was it hot. At that time, there was no refrigeration, and the units were so small, and with 3 little children and Kent only 8 months old, it was not very comfortable for about 2 weeks. Finally, our furniture came, which was not very much. We had a coal stove and no refrigerator. So I went to Haney and Scott's furniture store to see what a refrigerator would cost, so that when we got the money from Boyle, I could get the refrigerator. I picked out the refrigerator that I wanted and told Mr. Haney to mark it sold, as I didn't have the money to pay for it then, but would have in a short time. He replied, the refrigerator will be delivered today as you need it, and then when your money comes, you can come in and pay for it. Here I was, a perfectly stranger to him, but he trusted me. It was a Frigidaire made, and it lasted us for 23 years, and during that time we did not have to have a single service call. The house we lived in was a frame house with a kitchen, combination dining and living room, 2 bedrooms with a bath between them, 1 room in the basement, and an uncompleted upstairs. It was on a lot 50 feet wide and 125 feet deep. Now that we had got moved in and somewhat settled, then I started contacting dairymen about shipping their milk to the Morning Milk Company when the plant was completed. At this time, 90% of the milk being produced was sold as sour cream, as there was not much of a demand for whole milk. The company had thought that the plant would be ready for operation in November and then December, but it did not begin operations until January the 16th, 1942. The existing milk plants in the valley did not like the idea of an evaporated milk plant coming into the area, as they was afraid of losing their milk producers to us. Inasmuch as we was a Utah company, the rumors were many and very wild. We was a Mormon company, and the people should beware of us for so many reasons. Another thing that our competitors did was they tried to keep my men, whom I had selected to haul milk, from getting a hauling permit. We had to get an attorney and go to court. This was my first time to ever appear in court, but nevertheless my haulers were granted their permits. So on January the 16th, 1942, we received our first milk at the new plant in the total amount of a little over 12,000 pounds, but it continued to increase as the time went on until we reached around 80,000 pounds a day at the peak. With Pearl Harbor being bombed on December the 7th, 1941, and war having been declared, we were now operating under wartime conditions. In 1943, the government took over a tremendous acreage in the White Bluffs and Hanford and Richland areas and started construction of the atomic bomb plant. The DuPont company, who had the contract for the construction of the project, called on us and said we were to supply the milk to the people working on the project, and they said the number could be as many as 70,000 people. I had converted the dairymen from sour cream to whole factory milk, and now I had to convert them to grade A milk for bottling use. I had to get dairymen to build new barns, get cooling systems, and proper equipment, and with everything under priority, it was a job. But DuPont helped us out through the government. This got us into the fresh milk and ice cream business, of which the company still is. These were very trying times for me, as it was hard to get good field men who could do the job and get along with the dairymen. I went through 7 men before I got one that could do the job, and this fellow's name was Carroll, and he was with me for over 12 years. Also, a big change came March the 16th, 1946, after Morning Milk had operated the plant for just a little over 4 years. They sold out the entire operations of the company to the Coronation Company. It took some time to adjust to the operating policies of the Coronation Company because of them being a large company. It was much different than with the small Morning Milk Company. In the long run, it turned out to be a good thing for the employees that Coronation did take over, as they were so much stronger financially. It made my job easier after Coronation took over, as they were departmentalized. Under Morning Milk, I not only had the responsibility for the quantity and quality of the milk, but I also had the responsibility of distribution, and what a job it was to get trucks to deliver the milk with. Many days I would leave home at 5 or 6 in the morning and then not get done until 8 or 10 at night. At one time, I had 650 milk producers and 14 flatbed trucks hauling milk into the plant in 10-gallon cans. Then the economy of the country began to change, and the method of operating also changed. Dairymen began to sell out as the method of handling milk changed, and especially after the 10-gallon cans went out of use and boat tanks and pipelines took their place. The number of herds kept reducing until when I retired from the company on December 31st, 1972, I had only 15 producers and 1 tank truck hauling milk, but I was receiving more milk than I did from the 650 patrons previously. As early as I can remember, prayer has always been a very important part of my life. I can remember at home that of a morning when the chairs were set at the table, it was always with the backs of the chairs against the table, so that we knelt and had family prayer. Also, when the table was set, the plate was turned bottom side up, which meant we was to say the blessing on the food before we started to eat. Regarding prayer, I will always think of going to Grandpa Bagley's place, where both morning and night the chairs were back to the table, and at the head of the table was a grandpa chair where Grandpa sat. He always said the prayers, but one of the family would say the blessing on the food. When I was young, I did not get to go to church very much. It was just some during the summer months that I would get to go to Sunday school. In those days, it was the idea that sacrament meeting was just for old people, and I never did attend primary. So up through the 7th grade, I did not attend church very much. The most I ever did was when they organized a Sunday school at Box Creek, and we met in the Little Red Schoolhouse. Doyle was superintendent, and Sid Nielsen and Ken Brown were his counselors. This operated for quite some time, and then it was discontinued. When I was baptized, it was in the Cashurum Irrigation Canal north of Cashurum. I was ordained a deacon at the Cashurum Ward. When I was in the 8th grade and went to school in Ephraim, I always attended to all of my church meetings during the winter while I was in school. But then, when I got back out to the ranch during the summer, I did not attend too often, as I was with the sheep so much of the time. However, the 6 years I went to school in Ephraim, I was always very active in church. At Ephraim, I was ordained to the offices of a teacher and a priest. All during my time in Ephraim, we went to the South Ward, and my bishop was P.D. Jensen. He was also the principal of the high school. He had as his two counselors a Brother Sorensen and our next-door neighbor, Brother Green. It was during this time that one winter Zola got sick and was unable to either eat or drink for several days. They did not have a hospital there, so my mother took care of her day and night. One afternoon when I came home from school, Mother had two doctors, Doctors Anderson and Nielsen, there. Just after I came in the house, the doctor said that there was nothing they could do to help Zola, and she was dying. My mother said, "Carroll, go get Brother Green to come and administer to Zola." When I knocked on Brother Green's door, there stood Brother Sorensen visiting with Brother Green, so they immediately came and administered to Zola. This blessing was effective, and as of this tape, Zola is still alive. It was a long old pull for her, as she had lost all of her flesh and muscles were gone, so she had to learn to walk again. This has always been a real testimony to me of the power of the priesthood, and I shall never forget it. While at the Ephraim High School, I participated in quite a few activities. I was the activity agent for the school one year, taking care of the advertising for all school activities. I also sang in the Boys' Glee Club and was in dramatics, and the year I was a senior, I had a part in the one-act play, The Club. We went to the state one-act play contests at the BYU in Provo. There was 13 schools participating, and we won out in the semifinals, so we got to participate for the finals, and we won first place in the state of Utah. This was a wonderful experience for me. We stayed in Provo for about a week, and I'll never forget how big I thought Provo was. About 10,000 population at that time. That same year, I graduated from high school, and how proud I was to be a member of the largest graduating class in the Ephraim High School, 28 of us. That summer, I spent a lot of my time at the sheep camp herding sheep, and so when school started in the fall, I missed the fall quarter at Snow College, a 2-year school. I registered and went to the winter quarter only, but it was enjoyable to think that I was now in college. Again, I had a part in a 3-act play at Snow, and we took it to different towns to present. It was fun for the whole cast to travel together in a bus. At the end of the winter quarter, I again returned to the farm and sheep herding. In March, or the end of the winter quarter, when I returned to the ranch, it was lambing time, and this was real work, as we still had a lot of cold weather, so during the night, we would take turns getting up and going out to see if there had been any new lambs born. If there had been, Then we had to take the mother and her lamb or lambs, whichever it might be, because we had a large number of ewes that had twin lambs and sometimes even triplets. We would put them in the barn, which was enclosed and much warmer in individual pens. I was always glad when lambing season was over, and I could again get a full night's sleep. The last of April or in May, we would take our herd of sheep out on the Parker Mountains to graze until July the 1st, when we would then move our herd onto the summer range, which lasted until October the 10th. We would take the herd home, and they would feed the fields off, and then we would have to take them back out for winter range until February or March and lambing time again. It was quite a cycle, but Boyle and I worked very close together from the time Papa died until we left the farm in October of 1935. Even though Boyle was my brother, he was like a father to me, and I had so much confidence in him and his judgment. I had so much faith in his judgment that it made it hard for me to make decisions myself. I remember how so many times Boyle would try to get me to make a decision by myself. For quite a long period of time after I left the farm and had a decision to make, I used to wonder, what would Boyle think of this? The fall of 1929, I went to Provo to enter the BYU, as my mother had moved to Provo to live. Again, I just went to winter quarter and returned to the ranch again in March to help with the landing of the sheep and the farm work. It was the same old routine as the previous year, with me returning to the winter quarter at the Y in the fall of 1930. When I entered the Y in the fall of 1929, Dr. Thomas L. Martin encouraged me to major in agronomy, of which I took some classes, but it did not appeal to me, but animal husbandry was what I was interested in. So even though I was able to attend college for only 3 quarters, I had enough hours of credit at that time for a major degree in animal husbandry and a minor in agronomy. My last schooling was the winter of 1931-32 because the Depression and the drought hit us, and it was really hard to stay in business. One year we sold our wool crop for 39 cents a pound, and the next year it was 13 cents, and the next year we got 6 cents a pound for our wool. The price of lands also dropped from 11 and 13 cents a pound to 5 cents for the lands that were contracted, but for those that were not contracted, the price was 3 and 4 cents a pound. The same year that the price fell so low, we had a drought at home and did not have any water for irrigation, so we did not raise any crops. So we had to take our sheep and our cattle down to Severe Valley and buy hay and grain to feed them. I spent the entire winter of 1932-33 at Sigurd with the sheep and cattle and lived in a sheep wagon all winter. In the early spring of 1933, it took us 9 days to trail our herd of sheep with 35 miles home to Landing. That the winter, which there had never been more snowfall. There was about 2 feet of snow on the ground at one time, and then one night it started snowing and never stopped again until another 22 inches of snow had fallen. The valley was a total white, as all the brush was covered with snow, so we had ample water that summer. The winter of 1933 and 34, I spent most of the winter with the sheep as we had put our herd together with Uncles Orson and Talmadge Bagley. The last year I was at the Y, I started to go with Norrell Startup. So the next winter she invited me to come to Provo to attend her social unit's formal party. While in Provo for the visit, I was on the grocery store the East Side Market, operated by the family that my mother rented from. And Kenneth Olson came to deliver milk to the store. Kenneth had previously gone some with my sister Maida, and his brother Glenn had married my sister Irene. Kenneth wanted me to go with him on the rest of the milk route, of which I did. When he delivered milk to one of his customers, he looked at a quilt which this lady was making for him. The lady asked Kenneth if he was getting married, and he replied, "Oh, I don't know. But if this fellow here gets married before I do, he can have the quilt." After he finished the milk route, I went home with him and met his family, and one of them I met was Pearl. After the chores were done that night and we had had supper, we played cards and then had an enjoyable time, and then I returned home. After some time in Provo, I again returned to the ranch and sheep herding. The same old routine continued, and then in February of 1934, I again returned to Provo to attend the formal parties with Morrell. When I went to Provo, I took with me Eva Brown, a girl I had been going with that summer. Eva went on to Salt Lake to visit with her sister. It was getting close to the time for the formal party, and I needed a tuxedo to wear, and I knew Kenneth had one. So I decided to go see if I could borrow it. I decided to go to the Olson Brothers Dairy to see about borrowing the tuxedo. They had moved the dairy operation from west of Roseville, from the Wilson place to the Price Brothers farm south of Provo. I had not seen or heard of Pearl since I had met her the year before, and inasmuch as I did not have a date that night, I thought I would see if she would go to a picture show with me. It was milking time when I arrived at the dairy, so I went to the barn, which held 50 cows at a time. As I walked down the barn, I saw Pearl milking a cow, so I stepped up and said hello. She said, "How about a date tonight?" And I replied, "Sure, let's go to a show." She then informed me that she was one of the princesses at the Ward Gold and Green Ball, and her date called just before she came to the barn to milk, and advised her that he was ill and could not go to the dance with her. I readily and gladly accepted the invitation, so that night, February the 15th, 1934, was our first date. We had a lovely time that night, and then I made a date for her to come and have dinner with me on Sunday, as I had a date to go to Morrell Sunday morning and have breakfast with her. When I left Morrell that Sunday morning, it was the last time that I ever saw her after over 2 years of going together and riding each other. Carl and I spent Sunday afternoon and evening together, and the next morning as I passed the dairy on my way back to the ranch, I stopped to tell her goodbye. We started corresponding, and then in May, Uncle Dave Rust was going to go to the Colorado River on a trip and was taking Pearl's father with him, so he asked Pearl if she would like to ride out to Grass Valley and see me, of which she did. Prior to her coming out to see me in our correspondence, I had invited her to come out, and we would take a trip to southern Utah and see the scenic canyons. She replied back that Kenneth and Sarah were getting married and had invited us to join them. I wrote back accepting the invitation and proposal that we join them, so June the 6th was the date set for a double wedding in the Salt Lake Temple. Pearl stayed with us a few days, or until her father and Uncle Dave picked her up to return to Provo. Finally, the day arrived for me to go to Provo, so I left in Boyle's 1928 Dodge car. On June the 6th, Pearl's father and mother, Kenneth and Sarah, Pearl and I left for Salt Lake to go through the temple in the 6 o'clock evening session. The two couples with us went to the Temple Square Hotel and got our room reservations for that night, and then we went to the temple. After we had gone through the session, and our group, Ruby and Wes, was with us also, went into the room to have the marriages performed, Brother Christensen, who performed the weddings, asked Pearl and I to come to the altar first, and Kenneth and Sarah next. This made me the legal owner of the quilt of which I did receive. It seems that regardless of how solemn the occasion may be, there can always be some amusing thing happen. The day before we went to get married, I mentioned to Pearl that I had to get my temple garments, and she replied, "Why, I've had mine for a long time." Well, that afternoon, when we were getting our things together at the hotel to get ready to go to the temple, Pearl looked in her suitcase for a garment, and they were at home in Provo. She called Sarah up in her room and told her of her problem, and Sarah said, "Oh, no problem," that she had an extra pair. But then, when she got to looking for them, she did not find them. So Pearl called Ruby to have her bring an extra pair of hers, of which she did. The next morning, while Sarah was waiting for Kenneth to get ready, she thought she would look around, and she opened up one of the dresser drawers, and there was her extra garment. Another interesting thing was when Kenneth and Sarah and Pearl and I went to Ed Chateau Hotel. Pearl and Sarah thought that they should put on their wedding rings so the whole hotel clerk could see them and wouldn't think that we were single couples staying together. Talking about rings, I can say that Pearl did not get a diamond engagement ring, as I was fortunate enough to have only enough money to buy her a less expensive wedding ring. When they talk about getting or giving jewels, I say, I didn't give my wife a diamond, but I got a pearl. Our first breakfast after we was married was at Ruby and Wes's, as they had invited us, two newlywed couples, for breakfast. Our honeymoon trip was to Richmond, Utah, to see my brother Grant and his family. They were living with the Cartwrights, and so we stayed 2 or 3 nights with them. While there, we went up to Preston, Idaho to a dance, and that was my first time out of the state of Utah. Boy, that was something to say that I had been out of the state. We returned to Salt Lake and purchased us some furniture so that we could set up housekeeping. We purchased a beautiful new kitchen range which would burn either wood or coal. It had the 2 heating closets and a hot water reservoir on the side for heating water. This new stove cost us $125. A new breakfast set was also purchased, as well as some new linoleum for the floor. We purchased this furniture at the Southeast Furniture in Sugar House. After we had purchased our furniture, we then went to Provo to attend a wedding reception for Kenneth and Sarah, given by Dr. Christian Vincent and his wife, whom Sarah had lived with for quite some time because of the death of both of her parents. We didn't have a reception, but Pearl had received some gifts from some showers which had been given her. Our honeymoon was now over, and it was time to return to the ranch and get back to work. We loaded all of Pearl's belongings into the car and we left for the ranch. The furniture was being shipped from Salt Lake. We had the 2 back rooms of the house to live in. We used the big room as a kitchen and living room, and the small room for our bedroom. Our furnishings consisted of our new stove and breakfast set and new linoleum in the kitchen. Boyle and Emma let us borrow their kitchen cabinet to use, as well as one of their beds. Now we were all set up as a new married couple in the home we was to live in. However, we did not live in it a great deal, as I was out with the sheep so much of the time. The only time I was at home was when I would come down overnight for supplies, or Boyle would come out and stay with the sheep, and I would go down and take care of the farm. Not very long after we were married, Pearl had a terrible illness and about burned up with fever. Inasmuch as we were 40 miles from a doctor, we did not have one, and Emma took care of her. But I happened to be home some of the time when she was the worst. Pearl recovered, and then she went up to Provo to visit her folks. Pearl spent quite a bit of time with her folks while I was with the sheep. At the time we got married, it was a custom in Grass Valley for the local people to chivalry a new married couple. They would call at night after the couple had gone to bed and request them to promise that they would give a dance for all of the people in the valley. They didn't do this to us, as they got us at the July the 4th dance along with Ralph and Alda Sorensen, who were married in the Manti Temple while we were married in the Salt Lake Temple. And we agreed to give them a dance, of which one was held some time later. We received several nice gifts. Pearl's father and mother and Uncle Angus and Aunt Emma Olson came out and attended the dance. That fall, after we had brought the sheep home from the summer rains, they fed off the field, and then we took them onto the Parker Mountain for a while. And then when the snow came, we had to move them back down in the valley. During this time, Pearl spent some time with me, of which we enjoyed very much. One of the amusing things was a trip she made to the Parker Mountains. She came out on a horse, and when she arrived, she remarked that Vic Bagley had the dumbest bridge she had ever seen. I questioned her about it and told her I had crossed it recently and it was all right, but she said that it wasn't now. I asked her if she meant the one east of the house, and she said no, it was the one west of the house. I told her that it was not a bridge, but a cattle guard. So she said, well, she couldn't get old Ted to go across, so she got off and led him across. How she did it, I will never know. Spring came and it was time to start lambing, and so we brought the sheep home, and then we lived together during this time. After lambing, it was time to again take the sheep out on the spring range on the Parker Mountain. Inasmuch as we were expecting our first baby, toward the end of June, Pearl went up to Provo to be with her folks and where our doctor, Lloyd L. Cullimer, lived. I went to Provo June the 22nd and had a 10-day period I could be away, as Boyle was out with the sheep, and we did not get the irrigation water again until after July the 4th. The doctor figured that the baby was ready to be born, so on June the 24th, Pearl took a big dose of castor oil to induce the baby to come, and then that night Pearl's mother took us in the car, and we went for a ride over rough, bumpy roads and across railroad crossings. During the night, we took Pearl to the hospital, or rather nursing home, and Carroll Jean was born the morning of June the 25th. Boy, was we a happy couple with our first sweet baby and a sweet little girl. Pearl stayed in the Crane maternity home until July the 3rd, and then we took her and Carol Jean to my mother's place. At that time, the doctor still required the mothers to stay in bed for 10 days after the baby was born. So Pearl was still in bed on July the 4th. I went to the big 4th of July celebration that Colville always had. A huge parade in the morning, and then a big program and fireworks at the Y Stadium at night. After the program that night, I stayed with Pearl and Carol Jean a while, and then I left on the train at 2:30 for home. I went on the train to Sigurd, and then went with the mailman from their home, back home again, and then out to the sheep herd, and Boyle came home and irrigated. About the end of July, I went to Provo and got Pearl and Carol Jean. And then on Fast Sunday, in August, Carol Jean was best by Uncle Peter Olson. As I look back, now, as I look back now, I can see that I did not pull my responsibility as a father and holder of the Melchizedek priesthood, but I had not had enough experience in the church. I felt that Uncle Peter could give a better blessing than I could. My time was divided between the sheep camp and home, but most of it with the sheep. During this time, Carol Jean cried so much at the college, so Pearl had quite an experience. There was a lot of sleepless nights. As previously stated, we left the ranch October the 15th, 1935 for Carroll. Even though there are physical, temporal, and spiritual things which happen to us each day of our life, we somewhat like to break it down into various categories. So I will list some of the things that I remember happening to me. Some of the things I am not proud of, but they were stepping stones in my life and created in me a desire to do better. One experience, when I was about 7 years old, a livestock buyer came to our place and got my father to go with him to see about some cattle. This fellow's name was Jimmy Steele, and he smoked cigars. When he picked up my father, I went with them also, and Jimmy had a big cigar in his mouth, and he had not started smoking it, just had it in his mouth. We went and looked at the cattle, and then just before we got back home, he lit the cigar. It was time for dinner when we got home, so as we went in the house, I saw Jimmy throw this big cigar down outside. I ate my dinner in a hurry and went outside and picked up the cigar and went out to the corral. I was too little to carry matches, so I asked Mel Christensen, our hired man, to light the cigar for me. I can remember Mel saying, "Suck hard, Carroll." I can remember starting to smoke on that cigar, and the next thing I can remember was my father holding me, and oh, was I sick. My mother said that I turned yellow all over from the poison, even the white of my eyes and my fingernails. They thought that I was going to die. The result of this experience was for years I could not stand the smell of a cigar, and to this date it is not a pleasant experience to be in close contact with it in a room or a car. My next similar experience was several years later when I was in high school. Ellis Jessen, the boy I had been pals with ever since I started to school, was from a family where the father and son smoked. This one winter, while I was away to school, Ellis started smoking. So when I returned home in the spring, he wanted to have me smoke with him. I refused him for a long time, and then finally he and his brother persuaded me to have a smoke with them. I didn't want to, and I knew I shouldn't, because I knew it was wrong. Later that summer, one day Ellis was at our place, and we was out to the corral, and he said, "Let's go in the barn and have a smoke." I knew I did not want to and shouldn't, but Ellis made a cigarette and smoked, and I took a few puffs on it. I felt so guilty, and I looked through a crack in the wall, and I could see Boyle standing on the back porch looking out toward the barn. Boyle could read me like a book, so I knew he knew what was happening. Well, Ellis went home, and I went in the house feeling so guilty, as I was sure that Boyle could smell tobacco in me. Boyle, Emma, Irene, and I was all at the table, and we was about done eating when Boyle said, "Does Ellis ever smoke?" And I answered, "Sometimes." Next question, "Does Carroll ever smoke with him?" How deep this cut when I had to answer, "Sometimes." Boyle then said, If you think this will make a man out of you and you want to smoke, go ahead. But I don't believe that you do. He said that Eddie Best, his best pal, used to smoke, and he got him to try smoking, but he decided he didn't want to, so he quit. He said that he quit, but Eddie continued on, and as far as I know, he smoked the rest of his life. Needless to say, this cured my smoking, and how thankful I am to Boyle for the way in which he handled it. I have often wondered what would have happened if Boyle had threatened me some way. I guess one of the helping influences for not wanting to smoke was that out of all of Grandpa Bagley's children, grandchildren, and in-laws, there was only one that smoked, and that was Grandpa's next to the youngest son, Uncle Owen. What the record is today, I do not know, but I imagine it would still be quite a good one. We had a large hay barn, and I was not supposed to get up on it when I was small. Well, one day several of the kids in the neighborhood was there at home for a party. One of the kids and I decided to climb up on the barn roof. My mother came out and saw us, and she asked me to come down. Of course we did. She didn't scold me, and she didn't whip me. She just told me that I knew I shouldn't do that, and she took a nice little rope and tied me up to the fence so I couldn't play, and there all the other kids was having so much fun. Boy, what punishment, and how it hurt. It was my feelings. The irrigation ditch ran past our house and crossed the highway to the east of our house. One day, us kids was playing by putting sticks in the water on the upper side of the culvert that went under the road, and then we would catch them as they come out the other side. Maybe got angry at me for some reason and pushed me in the ditch on the upper side, and the water carried me into the round culvert, and I became stuck. It was fortunate for me that our neighbor, Brother Holt, was close by, so he came to my rescue and shoved me through the culvert with a long pole. There are many experiences that we have and forget all about them, but as I sit here, I look at my left arm and I see the scar that has been with me many years. When I was a young child, some friends were visiting with us one night, and their daughter, just a little younger than I, became angry at me. She grabbed my arm and bit a piece of flesh out of the fleshy part and spit the flesh out. I have never had all and had nil feelings towards LaBelle Brown for doing this, as a few years later, as a young girl, she got a serious illness and died. A pleasant experience I had was about 8 years of age. A fellow stopped at our place one day for dinner, and he had a beautiful shod horse. I thought the horse was so pretty, and I wanted to have him. I asked the owner how much he wanted for the horse, and he replied, "A nickel." I went to the house and got a nickel and gave to the man. After dinner, the fellow left and went his way, but I had the horse. My father never did tell me how much he had to pay for the horse, but as far as I was concerned, he was my horse, and I called him Nick. Talking about horses, I have ridden horses as long as I can remember, and I can remember of starting to school at 5 years of age. I know that when I sat on a horse, my legs were so short that they did not go on each side of the horse's back very far. In order for me to get on the horse, I would get on a pole fence, take the bridle reins in my hands, and then get the horse to come up close enough to the fence so I could get on. After doing this many times, I got old Pony and Billy trained so that when I would get on the fence, they would move over so I could get on them. I could stay on the horse by just holding the reins as long as the horse walked. But when I would have it lope, then I would hold the reins in one hand and wrap some of the horse's mane around my fingers on the other hand, which helped to keep me on. This was not a for sure method of staying on, as one day I was loping along on old Billy when he became frightened and jumped sideways, and off on the ground I went, with the result being a large cut on the side of my head. It was surely a happy day for me when I got old enough, or perhaps I should say, big enough, so the folks would let me ride a horse with a saddle instead of bareback. With the saddle on the horse, I could hold to the horn of the saddle. My next great accomplishment was when my legs got long enough to reach the stirrups and I could put my feet in them. At first, the folks had to put the saddle on for me, but that was a lot of bother. So I found me a box to stand on, and then I would lift the saddle upon the top of my head and push it over on the horse's back. I was really getting independent when I could do this. This meant a lot to me, for it was my job all during the summer and fall to take the cows to the pastures of the morning and go get them at night, so a horse was part of my life. The horse that will always have the fondest memories for me was old Ted, the little colt given me when Papa died. He was my horse until he died at 23 years of age after we left the ranch. Pearl used to ride him after we were married. It was a blessing to us when I was asked by the Morning Milk Company to move to Sunnyside, Washington, to be the field supervisor for the company at the new plant there. This move gave us an opportunity to have many varied experiences. We have always felt that our family was our greatest possession and wealth, and so naturally I should start out with them. One of my biggest milk shippers at one time was Ernie Nelson from California. He was a very wealthy man, and he used to purchase dairy cows in the Yakima Valley and ship them to California. He and his wife never had any children, and when I first knew him, we had 4. But as time went on, we finally got our 8th child. When Ernie would introduce me to one of his friends, he would say, "I would like you to meet Mr. Bagley. I have the money, but Mr. Bagley has the wealth. He has 8 children." When we arrived in Sunnyside, August the 1st, 1941, we had the 3 children, Carroll, Glenna, and Kent. Carol Jean started to school that fall in Sunnyside, but she had gone to school some in Provo the previous year. Kent was just 1 year old on January the 1st, and Lynette was born April the 16th, 1942. So that gave us 2 babies quite close together. Lynette was born in the Peters Nursing Home, and the doctor was Dr. Collins. Here he was now with 3 girls and 1 boy. When Kent was about 2.5 years old, we had a frightening experience. I had to go see one of the milk producers that evening after work, so I was taking the family with me. When we went out together in the car, Kent stepped in some mud, so I told him he would have to get in the back of the car with Carol Jean and Glenna. Usually he stood in the front seat between his mother and I, as Pearl would hold the net on her lap. We started out along the Outlook Road, and the girls and their mother were singing some songs, and all at once the girls screamed that Kent had fallen out of the car. He had opened the door and fell out. I stopped the car as soon as I could, and as I looked back, just in time to see him bounce from the roadside into the barricade of the road. I wanted to get back to him as soon as I could, but still I was afraid of what I might find. When I heard him crying, it was a sweet sound to me, as I knew there was still life. I picked him up, and all that had happened was that he had a little cut in the side of his head. He had on a General MacArthur cap, and that had protected. He laid his hose and running the moving machines for the picture show house beneath him, and many other jobs. Really, my best acquaintance was with him the year that we lived in Smithfield. Even though Grant was a very quiet individual, he was always so friendly with everyone. He was so against the person saying a derogatory thing about another one. He had a philosophy of, if you can't say something good, don't say anything about it. Even though Grant was small and body, he never let that stop him from trying. And when he went to a small college, he was in football, basketball, and track teams. The last years of his life, especially, he suffered poor health, and for years he was never free from a headache. He died at a very young age. Grant being small in size, he made it up in friendliness and with his smile. In fact, when he went to school in Eton, he was nicknamed Smile. A lot of people did not know Grant Bagley, but they knew Smile Bagley. Mama used to tell about when they lived in Richfield, and she would send Boyle and Grant to the store to get something, and when they would get home, Boyle would say, I won't go to the store anymore with Grant, as he stops and talks to everybody. Another thing that I remember so plain about Grant was how he liked peppermint. Every time he would go to Kishan, to the store, he'd always come home with mint, and I developed a liking for them too. I can also see Grant and Nellie when they came out to the ranch, just after they were married. They came in his Basana car. He had some of his fingers in a bandage, and I remember the one finger especially. He was working in a butcher shop and was feeding meat into a grinder, and he got his fingers in the grinder, and the end of one of them was taken off. He had quite a lot of trouble with the finger that the end was taken off of, but after going through the temple, the finger healed up. From the time before Grant got married, he lived in Richmond and taught school hours until his death. He also ran a technical service station. Grant and Nellie was blessed with three wonderful children, Maureen, Richard, and Lorraine. When Grant passed away, I went to Richmond to his funeral and was one of the speakers. Zola was the next to come into the family, and of the seven of my children, I guess I can say that we was the two that was the closest associated with each other when we were little. I guess a good term to use for us was we were buddies. She was the outdoor girl, and me being a boy, we did so many of the chores and outside work. We milked cows, fed cows, cleaned cow sheds, herded cows, yes, sometimes so much that we about got sick of cow herding. We separated milk, fed the pigs, hauled hay, irrigated, and you name the work on the farm, and we did it. Our two choice horses was Old Tony and Biddy, and especially Tony, as we could both ride her and then work or two with old Biddy. They were the ones we worked together. I remember one night after school we had to go to the field and get a load of hay. We were going down the lane toward the field, and the horses got scared of something and started to run. We tried to stop them, but we could not. So I gave the lines to Zola, and I jumped off the hay rack and ran up to the side of old Biddy and got a hold of the bit in her mouth and was able to get them to stop. As I think of this now, it makes me wonder, I must have been a fast runner, or they must have been some slow runners. My present conclusion is that they were slow runners. Joel and I was the horse kids too, as we was on horses so much, which we had to do with cow herding in the spring and summer so much, and then it was our job to take the cows to the pasture in the morning and bring them home at night in the summer. Joel and I had lots of good times together, as well as some that was not so pleasant. Just one of the amusing things that happened with Zola was one time she had stayed up to Kisherm with Uncle Frank and Aunt Rhoda and Tomlin. While there, some of our children came down with a contagious disease. So when Zola came home, the folks thought, well, now Zola will be getting the disease, and then the rest of the kids will get it too. Time passed, and Zola did not get sick. So one day Papa said, I guess that Zola must be immune to this disease, and with Zola's hearing being impaired and not hearing it clearly, she replied, I guess I'm no more of a mule than any of the other kids. As the children in a family, we grew up and more or less accepted things as they happened. But now that I look back and think of the various things that has happened to each one of the 7 children, we each one had our problems and obstacles to face. Inasmuch as Zola was born with red hair and each of her eyes being a different color, she carried an inferior feeling. Then, as a young girl, her tonsils and adenoids became infected and were not removed as soon as they should have been. Her hearing was affected, and she has gone all through life with impaired hearing. Then she had her serious illness, which about took her life and left her with nothing but bones, so she had to develop new muscles and learn to walk again. Then after her marriage, she gave birth to a baby boy after being near death's door all during her pregnancy. However, she was blessed with a lovely little boy, Floyd. Floyd was still very young when she gave birth to another sweet little boy, Bruce. However, time revealed that neither of the children could hear or talk. Even though this knowledge brought sadness to her, it brought into her life a greater love, understanding, and patience in raising Floyd and Bruce. The next time event took place with the passing of her husband, Carroll. However, then one of the greatest blessings of her life came when she met Herbert, and he later became her husband. He was a gift from God to Zola and her family. Even though Zola has had all of these obstacles in her life, she can truthfully say, I have been blessed, and I'm so proud of my 2 sons and what they have been able to accomplish. We are all proud of what this family has become too. When we went to school at Greenwich for a period of time, there were some Indian students that went there too. One of the Indians, in his joking way, used to say to Zola, you Christians, you lot. When Zola left home to go work, our close relationship was broken, but I still had the same memory of it. Maida was the next to join the family on March the 21st. Maida and my association was somewhat the reverse of Zola and I. During our early lives, we did not have the close relationship that Zola and I did, because Maida never did enjoy good health. Therefore, she did not do the outside work like Zola did. However, from their high school years on, our relationship increased as she and Mona lived together until Mona passed away. We even had a closer relationship after Carroll and I got married, and our children began arriving in our family because the love that Maida had for children. And then with Carroll and I being blessed with 8 wonderful children. Now is a good time to total up the number of grandchildren my parents had. Doyle had 4, Grant had 3, Zola had 2, Maida and Irene 9, and Vera 2, which makes a total of 11 for them, and we had 8. Maida made it a practice of remembering the birthday of all of these 19 children, and then the birthday of each one of their children, with a birthday card in dollar bill. Now, how the children all look forward to that birthday envelope, and especially the money, which is always the essence of our time. Grandma tells about Matt and his first birthday at the Noble Baptist. She said that on his birthday, he said, I didn't get a birthday card from Aunt. And then he remembered that she was no longer with us. Now to get back to Mabel's life. As I have previously stated, she never did enjoy good health, so she could not do the physical things of life like a healthy child could. This left her more time to study and do schoolwork, of course, which she learned to love. With Maida going on to school and Zola dropping out of high school and going away to work, that Maida and I closer together, and Zola and my association became rare. Both Maida and I graduated from Eton High School, and then went on to Snow College. And then when Mama moved to Carroll, I was again closely associated with Maida for the privilege that I went to the BYU. The first 2 years that the family lived in Carroll, Mama rented an apartment in Gilbert Drive, who owned a corner grocery, and Maida worked some for him. Finally, she started working for the Provo City Library, and eventually she became head librarian for the Murray City Library in Murray. She had such a strong desire to graduate from the university that while attending or working, she still took time to go to the University of Utah, where she was able to graduate with her degree. After several years at the Murray Library, she resigned and accepted the job working in the library for the Salt Lake City Library, where she worked until her and Glenn got married. Just one of the funny occasions in Maida's life was one night when she was a little girl. She became unhappy over something just before supper, and she said she was going outside and freeze herself to death, and it was a cold winter night. My parents did not try to stop her, so they just let her go. So the rest of the family all sat down to the table and was eating when Maida opened the door and came back in the house. And Papa asked her what was the matter, and she replied, it got too cold. That was all that was said, except Papa then told Maida to get up to the table and have a supper, of which she was happy to do so. Due to Maida's poor health, she dated boys very long, as she had been advised by the doctors that she should not marry. I guess that the one fellow that dated Maida more than anyone else was Phil's brother Kenny. They had a lot of good times together, but never anything serious. Their going together was before Phil and I ever met. When as much as Mama never remarried, and Maida never married, it was a blessing that they were able to live together up until Mama passed away. As Maida got her jobs at the library and had some income, she wanted to have some of the nicer things of life. But Mama, never having had money, only for the necessities of life, thought that it was foolish for Maida to buy some of these things. I remember when Maida bought her TV. Mama thought that it was so foolish, and she said, I won't look at the thing. But she did, and how much enjoyment she got out of watching her favorite shows, and one of them was old Ironside. In her later years, when her health was not too good, and she could not get around too good, she could sit and watch TV. Another thing, when Maida's income got more, she decided to get her a new car so that they could get around and go places. Again, Mama being conservative, she thought that Maida was so foolish for getting a car when she didn't even know how to drive. Well, Maida got her a car, and she took driver's training, and she got her driver's license, and she drove many thousand miles after that. After Maida got her car and her driver's license, she would then take Mama for a ride to see the various places, and Mama enjoyed it. We took several trips with Maida, but the longest we had was when Carroll and I drove down to Logan to Joe Kathleen's graduation from the Utah State University, and then on to Salt Lake, where we left our car and took Maida's Plymouth, and the three of us left to Jackson, Virginia to visit Kent and Shirley when he was in the service flag. This was a long and hard trip, but it was worth every minute of it, getting to see all the country, and then especially to visit Kent and Shirley, who was expecting their second baby in July, and we was there in June. With Maida marrying Glenn, it never caused her to lose her interest in the family. If anything, she enjoyed them more than ever. Even though she never had any children of her own, she brought happiness to all of our children. She will always be remembered by those who knew her as Aunt Maida, whom they all loved so much. There was one outstanding characteristic of Maida, and that was even in spite of not having good health, she always tried to be happy. She also had some serious operations so as to try and lengthen her life so that she could enjoy the families of her brothers and sisters. She liked to go visit the various families and have them stop and visit her. I know how we love to have her come to visit us as well as we go visit her. She always did her best to make everyone feel welcome. She went through a lot of pain and discomfort when she had her back operation, but she was happy to experience this to improve her health. The same with her heart operation, which was a blessing and gave her several years more of enjoyment. When she entered the hospital in Arizona for her last heart operation, she went with the feeling that it would be successful and she would be feeling good again, so that when we returned home from our mission to the British Isles, we could come to Arizona to see her and Glenn and have a good visit with them after we had left from our visit with Grant and Jones in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. It was also planned that Herbert and Zola would also come to Arizona, so the three couples could all be together. The heart operation itself was successful and functioned perfectly. In fact, when the heart began to function properly again, it began to remove the poison from the various parts of her body where it had been collecting during the ill function of the heart, and the system could not handle all the accumulation and this caused her life to be taken. This all took place, and her passing was just 2 weeks before we returned from our mission in the British Isles. So instead of seeing Maida and receiving her happy welcome, We had to and will have to live on with the fond memories of the past with her. I was the next addition to the family, but will not dwell any more on that at this time. But I will pass on to the next one to join the family, and that was Irene. She was a little fat, cheap girl, and beautiful, with beautiful curly hair. She was a sweet, cute little thing, and always had a sweet smile. She was very talented in music, and could have really made a great contribution if she had have developed her talents. The bright future she could have had changed when she was in high school in Provo. I guess I can use the term that is so often and too many at times used, and that is, she got started with the wrong crowd. There is no need to elaborate on this because this term covers a lot. We all loved her and hoped and prayed that she would again return to the fold. My association with Irene was the least of anyone in the family, because after her and Glenn got married, they moved back east, where they lived for a long period of time. And then when they did come back west and to Idaho, our only association with them was when we would stop at their home in Twin Falls as we was on our way to Utah or from Utah to Washington. Our visits were generally just a hello and goodbye. The life that she lived brought death to her at a very young age, and she too passed out of this life without experiencing the blessings of being a mother. Inasmuch as she could not have any children, she wanted to adopt a baby, but Glenn did not want to. They say that there is no need to think about the past, but I still can't help but wonder of how her life may have been changed by taking a child into their home to love and to take care of. Now I come to the last one to join the family, my baby sister Vera. She is the only one of the family that I can remember her entire life. I can remember one afternoon in October, Papa took me in the 1916 Ford, and we went down towards the Narrows, where Grandpa Torgerson had his sawmill, and we got Grandma Torgerson, who helped so many women deliver their babies. She stayed with us that night, and then the next morning, when I got up, Papa was sitting by the heater holding a baby. I went over to see it, and Papa opened the blanket, and there was a sweet little baby sister, Vera. So, Vera, I have watched you grow and develop from that day to the present. Vera's life has not been a life where that father and mother raised her. She was only a few weeks old when Mona's cancer on the side of her jaw got so bad that Papa took her back to Savannah, Missouri again to have the cancer removed. That meant that Vera had to be weaned from nursing and fed on the bottle and be taken care of by someone else. I can remember different women coming and staying with the family during this time, but the one I remember the most was Aunt Sabra Hatch. She was not our real aunt, but she also helped deliver a lot of babies, so everyone called her Aunt Sabra. It was not a happy Christmas for us as a family. Here was 7 children and a tiny baby and no parents with them, and the mother undergoing a very serious operation for cancer, which was located right next to the jugular vein. We were not forgotten on this Christmas, as Uncle Cyrenius and Aunt Lucille had all of us over there to their place Christmas Eve, and they had a big, beautiful Christmas tree all lit up with candles. I can still see it glow, and I remember Santa Claus, but I do not remember of any presents, but I'm sure that we did receive some. Mama's operation was successful, and we returned home again during the winter. By this time, Vera was only a few months old, but Papa's paralysis continued to get worse, and he continually became more helpless So Mama had the family, a baby, and an invalid husband to take care of. Papa continued to get worse until he died in January of 1920. So with Papa passing away at this very young age for him, as well as Vera being so young, she grew up without the influence of a father in the home and knowing what a father was. Even though Vera grew up without a father's influence, she still had the most wonderful mother a person could have. Vera's entire life at home was one with the scarcity of money, but with a mother's love. Vera, always being a very serious girl and realizing the scarcity of money, began her money-earning career at a very young age. We had neighbors in Ephraim just across the street that ran a lumber yard, and Mama did housework for them, and they had a young boy, and even though Roger was older than Vera was, she used to go take care of him, and from then on she worked and earned money. Her problem was not getting a job, but which one, so it became a case of who asked first. Vera always liked to read and study, and I guess she could have been called a book hound. I remember when we lived in Senior Christensen's house in Ephraim, us kids slept upstairs. Of a morning, when the rest of the kids wanted to sleep, Vera would have the light on and sit in bed and read and study. Vera not only grew up without a father in the home, but also without the brothers being around very much. Laurel got married when Vera was just a baby. Grant was at home only a short time before he went away to teach school, and I lived in the home only during the school season for the 6 years in Ephraim and the winter quarter, the 2 years at the BYU. Even though I did not live at home with Vera a great deal, I have always observed her life and what she has done. She was never one to go to social functions, and when she found the boy she wanted to marry, she kept company with him for quite a period of time, and then her and Byron got married. I have always admired Vera for her determination to succeed, of which she did with her education. Mama furnished the home and food for Vera while she went to school, and Vera had to work to get money to pay her way, and when she graduated from the Y, she had earned the money which was necessary to pay for her graduation, and she not only graduated with honors, but with high honors.
Shanley, the way the tape works on this part 2 is that there's only 1, 2, 3 sides, and like the last one, the 4th side's going to be blank, just because of the difference between Dad's tape and this tape.